Welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Christine Yim. I am a physical therapist and board certified orthopedic clinical specialist. I'm also a competitive ballroom dancer. Thank you for watching today's video, Essential Exercises for the Ballroom and Latin Dancer. We are in the beautiful dance studio called the Rose Ballroom in San Jose, California. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Artistic Physio, and let's get started. Okay. So the first exercise we will do is called a calf stretch. It's very important for ballroom dancers to improve and maintain their flexibility of the calf. The calf muscle, which is right underneath the knee and the back of the leg, is comprised of two muscles, the gastrocnemius and the soleus. The gastrocnemius is the muscle that sits on the outside, and then the soleus sits on the inside. Calf flexibility is imperative for ballroom and Latin dancers because we wear heels. And when we wear heels, this tightens the calf and limits our ability to use our ankle. So let me show you how to do a calf stretch. I'm going to stretch my right calf. So I'll place my right foot back, heel is going to be down, and then my left foot is forward with the knee bent. Now, before you stretch the calf, it's really important to make sure that the back heel is facing straight back and then your toes are facing forward. What happens very often is that most individuals stretch their calf, but their toes are not facing the front. So you end up stretching more of your foot. Yeah, so I'm going to turn it back just a little bit. I'll look down at my toes, make sure they're facing the front. Heel is back. The last tip that I'll give you about the calf stretch is really make sure the small space underneath your foot, this is called your arch, make sure you maintain that small space as you stretch forward, okay? Don't let the foot flatten. Yeah, again, you'd be stretching more of your foot than you would be of your calf, yeah? So before you set up the stretch, make sure you lift your arch, keep that space underneath the foot the same, straighten the knee, and then you can bend forward, and that's it. So this stretch here targets the muscle on the outside of the calf called the gastrocnemius. If you also want to stretch your soleus, which I would recommend, the muscle that sits underneath, all you need to do is just gently bend the knee. Yeah, doesn't have to be a huge knee bend, just a small knee bend. And then what you should feel like is the stretch of the second exercise comes a little bit further down the calf. Maybe you even feel some pressure in the ankle. That would be correct. So 2 exercises for a calf stretch. Make sure to hold the position for the full minute if you're doing a cool down routine after you're dancing, or 15 to 20 seconds for a dynamic warm-up before you practice. The next 2 exercises that we'll do is a hip flexor stretch and a quad stretch. Let's start with the hip flexor stretch. So the hip flexor muscle is actually a combination of 2 muscles. The psoas muscle, which begins at the front of our low back area or our lumbar spine, specifically this region here. It starts on the anterior aspect or the front of the vertebrae and actually come down, conjoins with another muscle called your iliacus, which is a muscle that sits where you put hands on your hips, come together and create the iliopsoas, and they cross the hip joint. Many ballroom dancers have excessive tightness of our hip flexor muscles. One example of why that would be the case are jive kicks. So anytime you're bringing the knee up, you're activating your hip flexor muscle. A second reason why hip flexor tightness is common in ballroom and Latin dancers is especially the posture that we keep. We dance in a more extended position, but we also need to be able to soften through our hips for our drives, right? So what ends up happening a little bit is the hip flexor tends to tighten, and this has been indicated in ballroom dancers with low back pain. So make sure you're addressing flexibility of your hip flexor. This is how we're going to do it. Yeah. So I'm gonna stretch my left hip flexor. I'm gonna come down, one knee down, one knee up, yeah? And before I actually stretch forward, which is what most people do, I'm actually gonna gently tuck the hip underneath me first. What you should feel, if this area is a little bit tight, is already a bit of a stretch. And then you actually don't need to glide forward too much. Same hold times as your calf stretch, 1 minute holds for post-dance or post-exercise, post-training regiment, or 15 to 20 second holds for a dynamic stretch before you begin your dance practice. Another variation of this hip flexor stretch is just to rotate your heel out a little bit. This puts the hip flexor on a little bit more of a stretch, still making sure you can maintain that hip tucked position. And then you're going to lean a little bit away from that side and do a side bend. From the front, it looks like this. I'm gonna rotate my heel out, make sure my hips are tucked, and I'm going to side bend, keeping my body straight, but side bend to the opposite side. And if you do this correctly, you should feel the hip flexor stretch a little bit higher up because you're targeting that psoas muscle where it begins at the front of your lumbar spine. The second stretch that we'll work on is a quad stretch. So this muscle is a combination of muscles that are on the front of the thigh. One muscle crosses the hip joint, but the rest of the muscles join together and then cross the knee joint. Very important for any type of knee extension or straightening exercises. So very common to have quad tightness because we use it so much in our drives, either eccentrically or concentrically when we straighten the knee before we prepare for a rumba walk. Yeah. So I'm gonna stretch my right quad here. I'll go down to the same position, make sure that hip is tucked, and all I'm going to do is hold my knee. Hold my knee in place and grab a hold of my ankle. Be careful here that you're not allowing the hip to go back. You actually want the hip to extend forward. So the difference between this stretch is you should feel it a little bit further down, not so high up. Yeah, so the quad stretch you should feel a little bit down the thigh versus your hip flexor stretch a little bit more in front of your hip, and if you do the variation, slightly towards the stomach region. And that's it. 4 essential exercises for the ballroom and Latin dancer. Want to give a huge thank you to Dance Vision for uploading this video. For the Rose Ballroom, for allowing me to film here. Again, follow me on Instagram at Artistic Physio for tips and tricks to improve your dance performance as well as your competitive results. And I will see you on the dance floor soon. Thank you so much.